Do, 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 do. We let it sink up. We let it sink up. Hello and welcome to Straight Onto Disney, a Disney deep dive and analysis podcast, where each week I, your host Jonathan, takes a deep dive into the history of each Disney film and the legacy that they left behind. I'd like to remind you that you can follow me on Instagram at Straight Onto Disney Pod, and you can email me your thoughts at straightontodisneypod@gmail.com. Hello and welcome to this week's Straight Onto Disney podcast, where we're going to be chatting all things the Aristocats. So we're moving into the 70s Disney films. And before we get into everything Aristocats, there's some mousekeeping we need to attend to. So I just want to apologise for no podcast last week because I did not have the voice. Having been in Bristol Pride at the weekend beforehand, I did not have the voice, and I did intend to record the Aristocats before I went away for the weekend. That didn't end up happening, so I apologise for no podcast last week. But if you want to see what we got up to last weekend, go ahead and look at the Jake Escapes Neddy Freeze vlog of the weekend, where some of what we got up to is in there, and it was such a fun weekend, and he's hoping we get to do it again someday soon. It's not live action remake, but we've got a live action Tiana project in the works that's meant to be like a spin-off. I'm not too sure what's going on with it, and that's set to be written by Coleman Domingo, and I can't remember the other person who is supposed to be writing that with him. And obviously next weekend is San Diego Comic-Con. Marvel has an hour-long panel on Saturday in Hall H, so it's going to be interesting to see what comes out of that panel. Hopefully the first official trailer for Avengers Doomsday that we can then react over on here. And he's hoping we get some exclusive announcements. I'm going to throw out there's probably some X-Men, some Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, probably, I'm guessing, is what we're going to be seeing. Maybe some more cast announcements, but ultimately I'm not sure. And yeah, that's really all the mousekeeping I have for this week. I'm trying to keep these smaller and just more meaningful to me now than just going, here's a lot of things that's happened in the exec. Then obviously D23 is around the corner, so we'll be having the full prediction episode coming soon to the podcast. The Aristocats was directed by Wolfgang Reitherman, produced by Wolfgang Reitherman and Winston Hibler. The film's story was by Larry Clemens, Vance Jerry, Ken Anderson, Frank Thomas, Eric Cleworth, Julius Svensson, and Ralph Wright. The film stars Eve. That's Eva, isn't it? Yeah. The film stars Eva Gabor, Phil Harris, Hermione Baddery, Roddy Maud Roxby, Sterling Holloway, Pat Butterim, and George Lindsay. Music was by George Burns. The film was edited by Tom Acosta. Studios was Walt Disney Productions. Distributor was Buena Vista Productions. The film's distributor was Buena Vista Distribution. The film was released December 24th, 1970, with a running time of 79 minutes. The film was released in English. The film had a budget of did not. The film had a budget of $4 million. And the film had a gross revenue of $191 million. Interestingly, a sequel to The Aristocats was being developed within December 20. Yeah. Interestingly, a sequel was developed in 2005 with an idea that it would be released within 2007. However, production was cancelled in early 2006. So, on December 9th, 1961, Walt Disney suggested that Harry Dirt and Tom McGowan find some animal stories to adapt as a two-part live-action episode for the Wonderful World of Color television program. By New Year's 1962, McGowan had found several stories, including a children's book about a mother cat and her kittens set in New York City. However, Tittle felt that a London location had added a significant element to 101 Dalmatians and suggested setting the story of the cat in Paris. Following a rough storyline, the story became following a rough draft, the story became about two servants, a butler and a maid, who were in line to inherit a fortune of an eccentric mistress after their pet cats died, and focused on their feeble and foolish attempts to eliminate the felines. Boris Karloff and Francis Boris Karloff and Francois Rosary were in mind to portray the butler and the mistress and the distress. Boris Karloff and Francois Rosary were in mind to portray the butler and the distressed madam. A subplot centered around a mother cat hiding her kittens to keep them out of danger in a variety of different homes and locations around Paris, France. During the filming of Escapade in Florence, McGowan brought him the story that had been written by Tom Rao, an American writer who was living in Paris. By August 1962, they sent the complete script to Burbank, where it was returned as rejected by an unknown executive at the Disney studio. Nevertheless, Tittle brought the script to Walt, staying at the Connaught in London. Disney approved the draft, but recommended additional cuts, which were made by February 1963, before filming was to commence in Paris. Rowe wrote a letter to Disney addressing his displeasure of the script revisions, in which Tittle responded to Rao that the changes Walt approved of would be kept. However, by summer 1963, the project was shelved, where Tittle, in a discussion with Walt, recommended to produce the Aristocats as an animation feature. For that reason, Walt temporarily shelved the project, as the animation department was preoccupied with The Jungle Book. Meanwhile, director Wolfgang Reitman learned of the project and suggested the follow-up project to The Jungle Book. Because of the production delays, Tittle was advised to centralize the efforts on live-action projects, and was replaced by Winston Hitler. In 1966, Disney assigned Ken Anderson to determine whether Aristocats would be suitable for an animated feature. With occasional guidance from Reitman, Anderson worked from scratch and simplified the two stories into a story that focused more on the cat. Walt saw the preliminary sketches and approved the project shortly before his death. After The Jungle Book was completed, Walt and his team began work on the Aristocats, which was still on after Walt's death. Hitler was eventually replaced by Reitman, who would abandon the more emotional story of Duchess's obsession to find adopters befitting of her kitten's talents, initially favoured by Walt's suggesting instead the film be conceived as an adventure comedy in the vein of 101 Dalmatians. Furthermore, the character Elvira, the maid, who was intended to be voiced by Elsa Lanchester, was removed from the story placing Edgar as the central antagonist in order to better simplify the storyline. Hmm. As with The Jungle Book, the characters were patterned on the personalities of the actors. In 1966, Walt Disney contacted Phil Harris to improvise the script, and shortly after he was cast to voice Thomas O'Malley. To differentiate the character from Baloo, Reifman noted O'Malley was more based on Clark Gable than Wallace Beery, who was partly the model for Baloo. Reifman furthermore cast Eva Gabor as Duchess, remarking that the freshest feminine voice he'd ever heard, and Sterling Holloway as Rogath. Louis Armstrong was initially reported to voice Scat Cat, but however he backed out of the project in 1969 for unknown reasons. Out of desperation, Scatman Crothers was hired to voice the character, under the direction to imitate Armstrong. Pat Butterham and George Lindsay were cast as the farm dogs, which proved to be popular with the filmmakers. That another scene was included to have the dogs when Edgar returns to the farm to retrieve his displaced hat and umbrella. Dal McKenna was considered to voice Rockford, but he declined. Ken Anderson spent 18 months developing the design of the characters. 5 of Disney's legendary 9 old men worked on the film, including the Disney crew that had been working 25 years on average. This is the last film to end with a Walt Disney production, and the first of the Walt Disney Animation Classics to open with Walt Disney Productions Presents. This would continue up until The Fox and the Hound in 1981. And so that's really all the production history that we have for that I could find for the Aristocats. And what I can see from here is that this story began as a really unique and interesting tale about cats within Paris that became a really unique and interesting dynamic story that would be told across animation. And it's really interesting to see that it began in live action and then drafted across to animation. And what we're seeing here is that an idea doesn't have to always be for the medium that it was presented in, that it was conceived in. And we can see from here that the Aristocats was very much conceived to be this more live action documentarian style for the TV shows at the time, but was really destined to be an animated film. And as much as we don't really chat about it a lot, and there's not too much legacy as we'll dive into later on, it's really interesting to see here that that's what we're getting from this film. The film takes place in Paris in 1910. On an autumn day, a mother cat named Duchess and her 3 kittens, Marie, Belos, and Toulouse, live in the mansion of a retired opera singer, Madame Adelaide Bonfamilia, I think, along with her butler, Edgar. She early on settles her will with her lawyer, Georges Harcourt, an aged, eccentric old friend of hers, stating that she wishes that the faithful Edgar to look after her beloved cats until they die. Only then, will he inherit the fortune himself. Edgar hears this from his own room, and believes he will be dead before he inherits Madame Adelaide's fortune, and so plots to remove the cats from a position of inheritance, clearly not thinking about how he would be essentially control of the fortune. despite having to take good care of taking good care of them. Edgar sedates the cats by putting an entire bottle of sleeping pills into their food, and then heads out into the French countryside to dispose of them. However, two hound dogs named Napoleon and Lafayette attack him. After the conflict, Edgar escapes, leaving behind his umbrella, hat, the cat's bed basket, and the sidecar of his motorcycle. In the process, the cats are left alone and afraid in the countryside in the middle of a thunderstorm. While Madame Adelaide, Recret the mouse, and Fufu the horse each discover their absence. In the morning, Dutch meets an alley cat named Thomas O'Malley, who offers to guide her and her kittens to Paris. They have a struggle returning to the city, briefly hitching on the back of a milk cart before being unfortunately chased off by the driver. Marie subsequently falls into a river after a train roars down the tracks and is saved by O'Malley. They then meet a pair of British white geese, Abigail and Amelia Gabble, who are travelling to Paris. The group heads off, leaving the countryside, marching like geese until they reach Paris and come across the girls' drunken uncle Waldo. Abigail and Amelia then depart to take Waldo home. Traveling across the rooftops of the city, the cats meet Scat Cat and his band, close friends to O'Malley, who perform the song Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. After the band has departed and the kittens lie in bed, O'Malley and Duchess spend the evening on a nearby rooftop and talk while the kittens listen at a windowsill. The subject of their conversation is the question whether Duchess can stay and be with Thomas. Reluctantly, Duchess sadly turns him down, largely due out of loyalty to Madame Adelaide, pointing out that Madame really does love her and her kittens. Some cuts to Madame Adelaide show that she truly is very unhappy without her cats and feeling very much alone. The listening kittens are disappointed, although they too wish to go home, but are very sad that they've got to say goodbye to Thomas. Even Belos goes as far as to say that they almost had a father. Edgar, meanwhile, retrieves his sidecar, umbrella, and hat from Napoleon and Lafayette with some difficulty. The cats make it back to their mansion, after which O'Malley departs sadly, after he and Duchess have a heartfelt farewell moment. Edgar sees Duchess and the kittens coming and suddenly captures them, places them in a sack, and briefly hides them in the oven. The cats tell Roquette to pursue O'Malley and get help. He does so, to which point O'Malley races back to the mansion, ordering Roquette to find Scat Cat and his gang. Edgar places the cats in a trunk, which he plans to send to Timbuktu, Africa, so they can never come back. O'Malley, Scat Cat and his gang, and Fufu all fight Edgar, while Roquette frees Duchess and the kittens. In the end, Edgar is tipped into the trunk, locked inside, and is sent to Timbuktu himself. Madame Adelaide's will is rewritten to exclude Edgar and include O'Malley. She starts a charity foundation providing a home for all of Paris's stray cats, to which most of the major characters come. To the grand opening, thereof features Scat Cat's band, who perform a reprise of Everybody Wants to Be a Cat. Napoleon and Lefort join in the party, but realize it sounds like the end. The words "the end" hit Napoleon on the head. Then he ducks down, singing the line, while it shows itself on screen. The cats finish their song with a happy ending, while the end title card dances. Then Toulouse says his final line, "Oh yeah," from earlier on, just as the movie officially ends, fading to black and showing the Walt Disney production under the end. And that is the Aristocats as a film, and I find it a really unique and beautiful film. And I think it's done so beautifully well. And I wish there was a little bit more production history to dive into and understand where it came from and much more of its depth. But from a film standard point of view, it's a really unique and dynamic film, and it brings Paris to the forefront and gives a new setting to dive into new and unique characters that fit within this world. And we get this really unique, interesting relationship between human animals that we'd seen within the 101 Dalmatians, and we get this really unique and adventure across Paris and get to see the beauty of the world. Which is why when we dive into the legacy, I'm a little bit surprised about something. I think the biggest shock is that there's no Aristocats attraction in Paris, considering how much the film is set within. And there's another film that we're going to get to in a few months' time when we get into the Renaissance, where I also agree, well, where is that attraction for that film within Disneyland Paris? You can probably guess which film I'm talking about, but I'm kind of shocked how very little there is of the Aristocats. Marie is a meetable character within the parks, and they do appear within the Once Upon a Studio short film. They appear within Disney Magic Kingdoms, and that's really it. There's not too much when it comes to the parks and legacy. Obviously, the Aristocats was going to have a live action, which is now being cancelled. They've not had a sequel, so really there's not that much to talk about, which is why this week's episode is probably going to be a little shorter and could have been released by now. Oh well. But yeah, it's a really fun and unique story, and I think ultimately young audiences should really go back and watch this film, and it's a beautiful film to its testament. So yeah, that's where I'm going to wrap this week's podcast up. As always, you can follow me on Instagram at StraightOnToDisneyPod. You can email me your thoughts at StraightOnToDisneyPod@gmail.com. Like and subscribe. Follow along on YouTube and Spotify. Drop your thoughts in the comments. What are your thoughts on the Aristocats? Do you love it? Is it not your favourite? Do you wish there was more rep in the parks for it? I know there's a few the Disney fans that adore the Aristocats, so he's hoping we'll get to see some more rep for it in the future. So thank you all for listening, and bye!